magic is
Okay,
got it.
cool. All right. Well, well, okay. For folks who are catching the recording, which it seems like is going to be mostly folks hopping in on the recording. Here we go. Got Heather popping in. It's actually about the right timing for the election, sublection, whatever you want to call it. I think it's definitely like a B-side. It's like it's a good enough B-side. Hi, Heather. You are very welcome to like unmute yourself and pop on your video if you want to, or just observe passively, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry,
Hi.
it's not letting me put my camera on for some reason, but thanks so much for hosting this. This is so awesome.
Weird. I mean, it is definitely like a Mercury retrograde shenanigan situation. Stop
Very true.
video. Weird. It shows like your video's on. It's just your video
I
is a
think
black screen today.
I think I accidentally pressed the wrong permission. Let me see if I can fix it in my settings.
Well, it is kind of fitting for like a Saturday that you just be like the screen, the box of black.
It's
You know.
it's true. It's true. I have COVID right now too, so not too much to look at.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Hopefully
It's
it's
like,
the kind that's like a cold that happens to be COVID and not the
yeah,
like, okay.
yeah, definitely that type.
Excellent. So we're really just getting started right now. It's just the three of us. I know Anna wanted to talk about some planetary magic. Um, and yeah, just open floor. What would y'all like to talk about? I know some things. I mostly know that I don't know everything or many things, but I'm happy to share some things or just kind of like have a free flowing conversation with y'all about planetary magic, Saturn. What else? What feels juicy? How's your new year so far?
Ooh. Um, it's good. This Cancer full moon is something. I'm a Cancer rising, so I think you're a Cancer rising, aren't you, Bear, or something
Yeah.
similar?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
also
yeah,
Cancer rising.
yeah. So it's a doozy. I like did not sleep last night at all.
Correct. Correct. I was like, this is great. I feel wonderful and so awake right now. Um, hopefully you did at least get some sleep.
Yeah, I think like around like 11 a.m. or something, I finally fell asleep.
Oh, that's late slash early slash yeah, that's a bit of a doozy. Oh, all right, and Hermes hijinks going on here. We got two of you. You have a face.
I have a face. Okay, I fixed it.
Yay. All right, that should be fun. Okay. Welcome. So let's see here. Planetary magic. Do you dabble in the planetary magic? Do you have a curiosity in that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I, um, yeah, I'm definitely interested in it. Um, I feel like when I first became interested in astrology, I was definitely like super like esoteric out there, and then when I found Hellenistic, I was just like so strict, like formulaic kind of, and so I haven't. I feel like evolved to that point where I'm getting into the astro magic, but I'm definitely like interested and open, and just I feel like I haven't like unlocked that like part of my brain yet, you know. But
Totally.
I'm super interested to hear about y'all's astro magic practice and like what you're up to. I'm just like I'm still in just that like zodiacal releasing obsession phase pretty much.
Word. Word is definitely it consumes a lot of brain power to be in that phase. What about you, Anna? What's your experience with planetary magic?
Well, I mean, dabbling
Hmm.
is a good way of phrasing. I think I was first introduced to just the overall concept maybe a few months ago. And it was really like low key what I was introduced to as some like just general overview of like, oh, Tuesdays are generally like, I think Mars
Hmm.
maybe.
Yep.
So maybe looking for like cutting, like something to cut. Like if you're trying to like release something, that might be a good day to do it. Um, and so on. And honestly, I've forgotten which day and like which planet. Like I'm kind of
Okay.
I did it like that week and I was like, this is interesting and it worked for what I was trying to do. But
Hmm.
then I haven't touched it again. And I saw it as a topic. I'm like, let's talk about planetary magic. I want to like get Bear's thoughts on this. This would be cool.
Yes. Yes, I'm actually going through now and just popping up my lecture slide. So back in September of 2021, I presented a talk for Nadia Shah's Synchronicity University called Practical Magic with the Planetary Days, where we talked about the planetary days and practical types of magic. So like you said, Tuesday, Mars Day, that's correct. And cutting, yes, that's a thing that Mars does for sure. And so like you could do that in the most like simple basic ways, like cord cutting ceremony, if you're into if you're kind of that realm of spiritual energetic hygiene. That's one application of cutting. Am I going to find this in anything remotely like a quick amount of time here? Let's see, let me at least pull it to the side so I can see your faces at the same time. So because what I want to do is just show a slide that's got the planetary days, so that you can see that visually, and folks who are catching the recording can see that visually too. And then we can also like talk about some other aspects of what's going on there with planetary days. And let me also remember to be good here and put on the captions and show the captions. Just make sure that they actually show up on the video. Maybe it'll be redundant with YouTube, but want to make sure that anybody who's tuning in and needs captions gets those. So talking about practical magic with the planetary days, like so planetary days is the place to start with that. Let's see if I can make this here, here, there. Okay. So I'm not gonna get too much into all of it. Can you actually see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're seeing the slide there for go almost now. But this basic talk, and we'll see how much Zoom actually crashes, which I think you're all still with me, maybe not. This is what happens when you're in a Mercury year, technology things during a Mercury year. Oh my sweet goodness.
I can still. That was funny.
Hear me, Hermes. Herald of Zeus, son of Maya, please let this talk happen today. So the planetary days. Pull up this share screen.
Can't make it up.
You really can't make it up. So I'll try to hold on to this thought and I'll pull this down quick so that we can stick together. So Monday through Sunday, although I start my week on Sundays. Monday, like the moon. If you speak a Romance language, then you can think about that Romance language, or quite a few Germanic languages too. So if you speak a little bit of Swedish, then you might go like, oh, måndag, tisdag, onsdag. You're talking about the moon's day. Tis or two relates to Tyr, who in the like Norse mythology is a warrior that you would relate to like keeping oaths and justice, but he's definitely like a fighter guy. And that connection does go back to Aries, right? So we've got Aries in Greek, or Mars in in Roman, Tyr in the Norse pantheon, but we're talking about like warrior fight 'em guy. Wednesday is Mercury's day, Thursday is Jupiter's day, Friday is the day of Venus, Saturday is the day of Saturn, and Sunday is the day of the sun. So that's super easy. Let's not tempt fate anymore with trying to do a lecture at the same time. So those are our planetary days, and there's a lot of different ways to access observing the planetary days or planetary devotion that range from the really practical and kind of like the most mundane, doesn't have to even be mystical or magical or woo, all the way to like really esoteric, quite energetic, subtle, psychic, all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, before I like, talk about the last 3 years of nerding out on planetary practice, what are you doing so far? I know, Anna, you said you're like Tuesday, Mars Day cutting. What other types of things have you tried, or different days of the week that like feel like ones that you want to observe?
I've intentionally like not written something that I needed to get I needed to get different opposing opinions to like listen to me and like work together and change their direction. I intentionally like waited until Wednesday to
Mhm.
write that, and it went better than I expected because it just wasn't working when I was trying like on Monday,
Mhm.
and I just waited until like Wednesday that week, and I was like, oh, okay, this is so much easier. And there's a lot of other factors there, but it helped. It definitely
Mhm.
helped. Um, the I think I've done a little bit um of everything, but just kind of like being aware, because it was probably just like a month long where I was like sporadically like, oh yeah, this might help if I wait a day and start it. Um, so I think I've done like on Mondays when I knew I had to kind of have like a more in emotional conversation with like a family member that I just wasn't feeling on Saturday. I've like had that call on Monday, and it's helped me be more in the in the in the zone they needed me to be.
Mhm.
um so it's just anything astrological for me. I'm coming from a high criticism area from all of my circles and like my background. So even like being open to astrology took me 25 years. And so the last
Mm.
several years, it's like still practicing the whole let me feel this first and kind of like get my feet wet and see if this makes sense.
Totally.
So that's kind of like what I'm doing with this. I'm like, let me see if this makes sense, because I don't know, I'm still in that testing ground.
Mhm.
Need that confidence to come out of the broom closet.
Yeah, this is definitely out of the broom closet for me being on this chat.
Word. Word.
Yeah.
Thank you for your trust and your vote of confidence and your like willingness to be seen in this space. I really do appreciate that.
Oh yeah, this is a great group.
What about you, Heather?
Yeah, once you were showing that slide and kind of talking about it, it was making me think. It was like 3 years ago, and like 2.5, 3 years ago when I was looking at this, but it was like I forget what it's called, but in Jodish, how they have the planetary hours too.
Mhm.
Um, and I had downloaded some kind of app that would tell me like what the planetary hour changes were, and then was just doing some kind of like mantra work um, to to align with that. But I haven't done that for a really long time, and would definitely like to get back into that. And there was something else that um, I thought of, but is slipping my mind now. But um, yeah, I guess it's just Orphic hymns. Yeah, I think it was around that same time I came across someone on the podcast. I can't remember who now, and then was listening to those and was like, whoa, this is activating something in my brain. Like,
Word.
yeah.
Word. Let's see here. What is the planetary hour right now? I know we started it with Saturn's hour, but it's okay. It's still Saturn's hour. At least here where I am, we've got another 8 minutes of Saturn's hour. And that was part of what I was looking at and going like, I think overall this is actually a pretty decent election. In some respects. So let's see here. Let me kill the slideshow. Tempt fate a second time and see if I can show you our chart for right now. Um,
Is it okay to screenshot your slides, Bear?
Totally.
Okay.
And I'll actually at the very least I will post the slides. If I can't find the actual video of the lecture, I could swear that I have the video of the lecture that I did in 2021. And if not, then I'll organize and like plan a little bit further out so people can prepare for it. Then I'll just do another round of the practical magic. Well, I guess I can say here because it's my platform. I am building out what's probably going to be a 7-week course, or it'll be just a revolving ongoing course. So I can't decide if I want to take everybody from the sublunar sphere to Saturn in order, or if I want to just have like a weekly class where it's a drop in and we'll talk about the planet that's kind of most ripe for engaging in that particular time. But Saturn is that planet right now, and Saturn is going to leave Aquarius, right? The beginning of March. So these next few Saturdays, this Saturday, next Saturday especially, are really, really great times for connecting with Saturn. So, and in terms of the planetary hours and the planetary days, they're continuous. And so it just so happens that on Saturday at sunrise, it's Saturn's hour. And then it goes into Jupiter's hour and Mars's hour, and then the sun's hour, and on, so that when we hit nightfall, it's Mercury's hour. It's the night of Mercury. So you can actually just continuously count those planetary hours. So right now, since it's Saturn's hour, I'll go ahead and recite the Patrick Dunn's translation. His translation. The Orphic hymns, really, really great. Good for the occult practitioner. Every translation has its own like pros, cons, pluses, minuses, and all that. I also really like Sarah Mastros's Orphic Hymns Grimoire, much more modern language, and the poetry is keeps the traditional dactylic meter, but in a modern parlance. Okay, so Patrick Dunn's goes, ever young father of the blessed gods and men, strong, clever, pure, almighty Titan, you exhaust all things and then restore them. Adamant are the chains you wind about the boundless universe. Kronos, father of Ion, Kronos, sung in many myths. You are the star-filled child of Gaia and Oranos, birth, growth, and withering, O honored Prometheus who lives in every part of the cosmos. Wily, brave creator, hear the request in my voice. Bring always a prosperous conclusion to my life. And if you compare that to the Thomas Taylor, right? Ethereal father, mighty Titan here, great sire of gods and men whom all revere, endued with various counsel pure and strong, to whom perfection and decrease belong. Consumed by thee all forms that hourly die, by thee restored, their former place supply. The world immense and everlasting chain, strong and ineffable, thy power contains. O Father of vast eternity divine, mighty Kronos, various speech is thine. Blossom of the earth and of the starry skies, husband of Rhea and Prometheus wise, obstetric nature, venerable root, from which the various forms of being shoot. No parts peculiar can thy power enclose, diffuse through all from which the world arose. O best of beings, of a subtle mind, propitious here to holy prayers incline. These sacred rites, benevolent attend, and grant a blessed life, a blameless end. Patrick Dunn's translation is appropriately short. It matches how brief the Greek is. Thomas Taylor gives us a lot more to work with, and the rhyming couplets make it a bit easier to remember. But I think, what I love about Patrick Dunn's translation is that bit at the end, wily, brave creator. There is this, like that wily nature of Saturn who, Saturn castrates Oranos, castrates his father. But if we look deeper at what is the visual metaphor? What is the natural nature-based metaphor that's being presented to us when we talk about time severing the connection between sky and earth? Well, if we think about sky and earth as themselves being metaphors for our consciousness and our body, it's this suddenly becoming self-conscious that gives us access to time, right? We are already incarnate beings who are born and who die. Like there is this natural flowing cycle to our existence. But it wasn't until we became self-conscious of it that we get things like time, that we get like writing and symbols and all of these things that emerge. And I think part of what, the part of what various cultures have something like this, right? So like in the Greek, it's the ages of man. And I think you could make a comparison to, I believe it is it the Hopi or is it the Navajo? um, I am forgetting exactly which. It is Hopi mythology, but there are a couple different folks who are Southwest American indigenous peoples who share a similar motif of people coming and arriving in stages, and this like 5 stage in particular, these 5 stages of awakening. And I think when we look at those, maybe it's not true or accurate, but it is an interesting thought to consider. What 5 stages of development have people gone through? Has the human species kind of moved through? And if we think back to like first gathering tools, first figuring out fire, first figuring out how to domesticate animals, how to domesticate plants, those things had to happen prior to civilization. And civilization seems to be kind of like the 5th wave that we are still in presently. Um, and Saturn, right? We're talking about a planet that is about time. But when we look at, and Saturn, has a lot of malefic connotations. But even within the Greek, when we talk about Chronos, or if we're talking about Saturn from the Roman perspective, there is this association with golden age, like this sort of like golden age of agriculture, but it does predate even that sort of like motif that gets presented. Saturn harkens back to a time before that, when like humans didn't have to toil in the fields. We weren't exerting effort, right? So like Saturn's myth is pointing to both now today what it's like, and many of the things that we experience in terms of ending in time and mortality and death. But Saturn is also pointing to this time that is before that. And I think it's pointing to this like memory before self-consciousness, or this like lingering sort of connection to what it was like to be like an animal that was a human rather than a human animal, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to chime in. I may be hosting this room, but this is a live chat, not a bare lecture.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about like those like 5 stages of development, and like thinking like that macrocosmically and then just like microcosmically, just like human development. Like I work at a school, I work with really young children, and so just seeing them in that first plane of development, oh my gosh, I'm getting chills like thinking about it. But seeing them in the first plane of development when they're just like acquiring these skills, and there's kind of like these bubbles floating around, occasionally bumping into each other, having these interactions. And then like sometimes when we have like a big school-wide event, like kind of sitting back and observing those social structures for the young children and then the social structures for the adults, and how it's really the same, just different levels of skill and complexity. And yeah, that's a pretty deep thought to play with. That where are we, and do you feel like it's like a linear progression there, like this like 5 levels, or do you feel like it's cyclical, like almost like the yugas, like, do you know what I mean?
Both and I think there
Okay.
is definitely a cyclical nature like the yugas. And I think like, okay, let me try to make that a second thought, because that can expand and sprawl out real fast. So what you were saying about young kids, I spent a couple of years in AmeriCorps working with like elementary kids, and I also worked with like junior high through returning adult students, so like up to 21, so between like kindergarten and 21-year-olds. And I've also bartended, and I've joked as a bartender in interviews like, well, actually the time I spent working with kids really does prepare me as a bartender, because when people drink they revert to being children. So figuring that out. But earlier today I was in Kristen Mathis, Your Cosmic Auntie, aka Mysteria Mundi's writer, brilliant astrologer and writer, and she talks about the Orphic hymns actually. And in her live chat, we were talking a little bit about this kind of like developmental thing, and the Orphic hymns. Like, do the Orphic hymns present? Well, you should check out her thing and get her take on that. But I had mentioned that something that she had said during that live chat made me think about Mark Jones and his work. I want to say it was the 2019 his pre-conference lecture 2019 NORWAC. 99% certain. That's what I'm remembering. but he was in the States for sure because this was in person, so it should have been there. He was talking about the first 5 in particular, the first 5 years of development, and mapping out human psychological and physiological development with the chart, and with the signs and as they progress in particular. So kind of that like Aries origination point, Taurus figuring out like, babies constantly got their hand in their mouth and they're like putting everything in their mouth. How does this feel? How does this taste? Let me learn it. And then they Gemini figure out language. And then they start to like, oh, object permanency, object constancy, you're separate, I'm not you. That's what allows you to go into Cancer and like become an individuated consciousness, right? And so he explains that. But looking at the hymns, the hymns, there are some folks, I think Patrick Dunn talks about it in his introduction to the hymns, as does Sarah Mastros, that it seems like these hymns were used as an initiation ritual, and that they were meant to be read from sundown to sunup continuously, right? And the hymns they definitely pick up all of the planetary intelligences are in the hymns, plus a whole bunch more. And so what are the connections between the Orphic hymns, but like just the idea of the planetary intelligences or spirits or beings that are being appealed to and evoked? There's a lot of different ways to approach it. And so one of the ideas that I've been kicking around since the talk that I gave for Nadia Shah back in 2021 is the idea that you can look at your chart and you can connect it to the planetary days based on your own rising sign. And so that like, yes, Mondays could be a day that's about emotions and bathing and resting and nourishing yourself, especially for Cancer risings. But why would that hold true for every single rising sign? If you have Cancer as your 6th house, yeah, maybe resting would make a lot of sense, but it might also be a caretaking day. It might also be a day that's about handling other types of routine logistics that help you keep your life maintained and kind of flowing. Or if you're a Libra rising, then that Cancer is going to be your 10th house. That's probably more of like a bossing out career day for you than it is like, let me please just like hang out in a bubble bath kind of a day. Does that make sense?
So like the planetary days being more associated with the house that they rule versus starting at 1.
It's my working theory. And now I have to like go and finish all of these articles because I've been like trying to slowly build out all 7 days so I can launch them in a big package. But I think now I have to just release them one off as I finish them. So yeah, basically going through, I can like tempt fate a second time and see if I can show y'all one that's a little bit more developed with some of the houses broken out. Because basically like, okay, so today's Saturday, so we can kind of think about what's going on for Saturdays. So 2 of us are Cancer risings. If you care to share, no pressure to. What's your rising sign, Anna?
It's an Aquarius.
All right, so this is a perfect example, right? So one of us in this group here maybe is having a very first house and or 12th housey day. So for you, Saturdays, Anna, I suspect, are going to have both 12th and first house qualities. And this Saturdays might be a day where you're like, please leave me alone. I would like to me alone in my room, like that song from back in the 90s, just one of them days, right? Where you're like, I want to be all alone. Don't take it personal. Just leave me to myself. Whereas, yeah.
I'm selfish. I'm very selfish. It took a lot for me to like commit to doing something after this. I'm like, okay, I will do it. But just generally, this is my day. I'm getting everything in order. Don't touch me.
Yes. Right. So there's that first house and 12th house quality, because that's the part of your chart that's being kind of lit up today. And then it's Saturday, right? So on a Saturday, Saturn things. So like quiet, no, alone, solitary, those would be Saturn things. But what other types of things are Saturn things, right? Like Saturn can be associated with anything that's really like intoxicating. We probably don't want to talk too much about that on a recording that we're sharing, but we can just say that intoxicants are Saturn's realm. But what else is Saturn's realm? Like minerals, things that are, one of the things I've been playing around with is like things that are plain, right? Plain, simple. It's not ornate. Saturn doesn't do fancy. I'm drinking black coffee right now. Normally I put a little bit of like dairy in my coffee. But one thing that I do on Saturn days, if I have my oat grains, right, is another one. So you could like have some oatmeal, have like focus on having some sort of grain and not doctoring it up. That might be really kind of boring to be like, I'm going to eat some just like a bowl of plain millet, but Saturn might appreciate that. Um, what other types of things? I mean, obviously, like I'm sitting here, I'm wearing my Saturn shirt, and it's black. I do wear other things just all the time as par for the course, but like you can, so Austin Coppock has a planetary intro to planetary magic course. It's like a 4-part series that you can purchase recorded lecture package. And I went through that a little over 3 years ago, and then just like really worked that homework every single day. But he talks about a couple of different approaches to attuning to the planets, right? So you can do, like you were saying earlier, Anna, about Tuesdays. Like Tuesdays is a Mars day, so cutting things, bring in cutting stuff, right? Well, Saturday is a Saturn day. So what type of Saturnian things can you do? You could attune to Saturn by eating things, or like, right, attunement through through olfaction or through diet. Smelling things, olfaction. What are Saturnine smells? It's like actually things that smell like shit, things that smell awful and terrible. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that route to start with. Um, but you could also do like attunement through charity. So again, this is like Austin Coppock's kind of framework, and I've systematically gone through and tried different ones. Different planets respond in different ways to charity. So if you're thinking about literally charitable donations, who are Saturn's children? Right. And this is something that I want to say that you can read that same sort of approach or thought process in Ficino, Marsilio Ficino's 3 books on life, talking about like the people who are children of this particular planetary intelligence, right? So like old people belong to Saturn, criminals belong to Saturn. People who are outcasts or marginalized would be like people that Saturn would be like, yeah, you're my people. Cats can be Saturn people. Um, any animals that are solitary, sound horrible, or eat their young. Those are those are the animals that belong to Saturn. So like ostriches are Saturnian because they sound terrible. We could probably make an argument that bears are Saturnian, because in the words of my Uncle Pat, if you're walking in the forest and it suddenly smells like a dumpster, there's a bear nearby. This is true. If you live in a rural enough place, you may have had this experience. And we can think about like the fixed star Alcade, which is the tail of the Big Dipper, or the tail of the Big Bear, is associated with bear imagery. And that star is associated with the planetary natures of Saturn and Mars. And so that would track, right? Bears are typically solitary. They don't sound very nice. They smell bad. And they do occasionally eat their young. So all boxes checked. So those are like kind of Saturnian things, ravens and crows, all the corvids. They don't sound pretty. They're not nightingales or other types of songbirds, right? The songbirds we're going to give to Venus. Venus sounds pretty. So those are kind of like some Saturnian, some different things that fall under the sphere of Saturn. Black is the color of Saturn. You could work with like stones or crystals. Either you stones or crystals people? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Like rocks.
Like rocks, yeah. Oh yeah, I've got like a handful of rocks on my person right now. What kind of stones do you think would be Saturnian stones, or do you work with any stones that you already know are like appropriate to the sphere of Saturn?
Black kyanite, maybe. Just anything that's black comes to mind. Oh gosh, slipping my mind. I'm thinking of another black stone that I've given to a lot of like Saturnian people, but I can't. Yeah, I can't think of it off the top of my head. But yeah.
Yeah, any black stone, anything that's really heavy and dense and really hard would also fit for Saturn. And one of the associations that I've seen a lot is actually blue sapphire, but I recall reading in, I want to say in Eric Perdue's recent translation of Agrippa that sapphire was a word that was also used to describe lapis, which is a hard, very dark blue stone. So the colors of Saturn, definitely black, but also brown, really, really dark blue. And if we think about Saturn's association with the dirt, the soil, things under the soil, minerals under the soil, but also irrigation canals and sewage. Saturn is also the planet that has the eighth, well, the seventh or eighth sphere, depending on how you want to count it. Seventh planet. Saturn is the last sphere before we ascend to the celestial sphere. Saturn is the gatekeeper of the stars. What's the vault of heaven look like at night? Really, really dark black, maybe very, very, very dark blue, depending on exactly which hour you're looking at the sky, right? Or how we're thinking about blue, because our modern notions about blue are not how the ancient world like understood that word or that color. Like sky and clear and blue were not all once like synonymous. So Saturn is like a really interesting planet. On the what other types of things on Saturn? I think for me, I've made a concerted effort to try to speak to my grandparents on Saturn's day, but here's where like those rising signs come into play, right? As a Cancer rising, Capricorn is my is my seventh house, Aquarius is my eighth house by whole sign. And so I'm looking on Saturdays at rather relational interactions, right? I'm like having a lot of client consultations as a seventh house topic. I'm often doing a lot of like business stuff and working on collaborative projects with people or doing communication for those collaborative projects because Aquarius occupies my eighth house. So for me, Saturdays activate like, hey, it's time to talk to people. It's time to talk to folks that I inherit things from. Well, not that I'm like talking to my living grandparents trying to get things from them, but you inherit your very existence and your incarnation and like, you know, a portion of your genetic material from your grandparents. Saturn is elders and old people. And so if I have the time on Saturdays, I'm like, oh, hey, I should call my grandparents. Let me have a chat with them. Let me talk to elders. Let me talk to mentors. Let me collaborate with folks. If I have a marriage meeting, well, I'm experimenting with planetary hours because there's some ideal planetary hours on Monday nights for talking to for talking to a spouse, but that's where you kind of have to just like experiment. Do you do the thing that is prescribed for the planetary hour? Do you fit that into your own specific natal chart? For me as a Cancer rising, like I think it does make sense, both in terms of my little experimental framework and the classic tradition. But like what other planetary days? Saturdays are a good one. I think a lot of people often have Saturdays. Well, many folks at least have Saturdays free from obligations. But are there other days that you've been like, earlier, Anna, you were talking about, I'm going to wait until Wednesday to do this writing, cutting on Tuesdays. What about Sundays or Thursdays or Fridays? Do y'all mess with those days? Have any practices there?
I feel like Sunday, just if you just kind of think about it, it feels just like a beam of light, like coming in through a window. It makes me think of like being a young child, just like going to church and just being out in the sun. I don't know. It's just, yeah, it feels very, very warm and like, yeah, that's not a fully formed thought, but Sunday for sure. Yeah.
What about you, Anna?
Sundays are probably my most intentionally social day. They don't end up being the most social day, but it's the day I feel like is the easiest to kind of like make those connections that I want to make sure if I miss them the week before that I don't start like the new week without, hey, how are you doing? So I think I am probably seen the most on Sundays, or at least it feels the easiest to be seen. And that I'm also trying to like check in with myself and get right before I start the week, if that makes sense. So I'm also like looking at myself and being like, hey, how are you doing? Do you feel good before you start your Monday?
Yeah, I like that. So what I heard you saying is, oh yeah, on Sundays I check in with my seventh house. I'm like, hey, what's up, Leo stuff? I need to be in here having these one-on-one interactions. Do you find that it's like besties, like close partners, rather than like, oh, let me get on social and chat with that person that I like every once in a while. I like more acquaintance type, or um less familiar type people.
Yeah, it's definitely my close people, like who is in my circles, um, that I want to make sure I'm keeping that energy flowing with.
Yes,
I would say
yes.
like the outer people is probably around Thursday that I'm thinking, is there someone I want to talk to before Saturday starts? So that's kind of like Thursday-ish through end of day Friday. I'm like, is there someone in like my outer circles that I haven't like caught up with? This is a good time to kind of be like make that phone call across the state lines. How are you doing? It's been 3 months
Mm,
long, but I have that energy now.
yeah. So you're like, okay, on Thursdays, you say, hey, what's up, 11th house people? Hey, what's up? All right, I can think properly here. Second house people. So like, right, because the 11th and the second are square. 11th house people being those like those voluntary associations, but they aren't like, you said, like calling those people who are more long distance, right? Because if you were in your third house friendships, they'd be people who are really close to your environment. They'd be local to you. Or
Right.
maybe they'd be like siblings who are far away, or cousins who are far away, like your childhood friends, maybe, who are distant. But you're describing 11th house people, like who's in my outer circle that I want to be in connection with. That sounds more like 11th house type people. Um, are those folks that you're thinking about on Thursday? Do you also have like some sort of like shared material connection? Do they have some second house type qualities? Or do
Yeah,
you
they're
do other second house activities? Like you're not that anyone balances a checkbook anymore, but like, do you check your bank account? Do you like go stock your pantry on Thursdays?
um I would say Thursday is definitely a day I'm more likely to want to get like my grocery order placed because I hate going on the weekends. I used to work at a grocery store and I know it's not the best day to go. Like, I know the times I want to avoid, I know the days I want to avoid. So like really I'm trying to do those off hours. So I probably done all my grocery shopping by that point. And if I haven't, I'm like getting it in.
Mhm.
Um, but it is linked to money because like most of these longer distance ones, it's either a restriction of money that I don't see them as often, or I've met a lot of the people that I like to talk to, voluntary friendships interactions through my job. So like I have connections in other states that I've never met them, but I'm like, I really like working with you. So now we're friends and I promise you a call. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then let's see here. So Heather, for you, I'm curious, on Thursdays, do you like let's see here before I switch over. Is something you said about and about like the money. The second house is also like, I it's one of the easiest things to get out of the habit of is picking the most literal, like on the nose descriptor for a house. And if the second house is the resources that make up your first house body, well, like food, right? Like literally your pantry. And you're like, I do my grocery shopping. Well, yeah, it makes sense if you have a like professional knowledge that shopping on the weekend is dumb. Let me go do it on Thursday. That's great. But you would think if we're doing the like Monday belongs to the moon is food, then you'd think everyone would want to like get their food on Mondays, right? But you're not doing that. You're like, Thursday is time to stock the pantry and like check in with my 11th house homies.
Yeah, I would say between Monday and Thursday, I'm probably doing my grocery shopping, but like Thursday is I definitely don't want to go grocery shopping this weekend. Did you forget something? Let's do this if you didn't do it.
Yeah, it's time to check the inventory.
Yeah.
Check and replenish the inventory. And then, so Heather, do you find so as Cancer risings, Jupiter days are going to activate ninth and sixth house. Do you find you're like, and I know you mentioned yoga earlier, I often think about yoga in the sixth house because it is like, even though the sixth house Hellenistically is this place that's like crisis, illness, disaster, things falling apart, right? Like we do stuff to prevent the things that fall apart and we do stuff to fix it after the fact. And so I think about yoga as this really interesting kind of like that yoking and like getting into this ritual and routine, at least as I understand yoga in relation to some of the, like the spiritual principles that come with multi-lifetime schema and, and some Eastern thought there. My access point being Buddhism, but I know there is some overlap between Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. As I understand it, that yoga practice, that yoking of consciousness in the breath, is itself this routinized system or process that is meant to help us be able to die better, be able to meditate better. Like physically, those asanas are meant to make it so you can sustain a cushion practice, right? I think a lot of people, especially, maybe in the last 10 or 15 years, have learned yoga as like an exercise modality, but it's like and it is a set of exercises, yes, that are spiritual exercises, they're physical exercises, and like you approach the asanas from a spiritual place, and then you can like it's like super meditation, I guess, is kind of my Westerner way of trying to summarize that. But I think about that like yoga in the sixth in some ways. The ninth house is obviously the Pisces ninth house for all Cancer risings. You can link to spirituality, spiritual teachings, higher education, or travel. So I'm curious, do you find yourself like engaging in kind of doing that spiritual expansion, higher education learning? Are you focusing more on whether you're in school or out of school? Are you kind of trying to figure out like, what do different people say? What do different cultures say? How can I travel literally or like metaphorically?
On Thursdays or in general?
Yeah, on Thursdays or in general, or if you're like, nope, on Tuesdays, I feel like doing all those things.
Yeah, no, I'm curious now to see like I only go into a studio periodically to practice. I mostly just practice at home, but now I always go in the middle of the week, so now I'm curious to look back and see if it was Thursdays that I was going to practice. But yeah, definitely. I think yeah, what you were saying about like asana practice being about like preparing for dying and preparing for just like moving through life and accepting the cycles. Like I was thinking recently about how like by the end of an asana practice, like I've never been like, I don't want to do shavasana. Like I just want to keep going. Like I'm always like, I'm ready to die. Like put me in corpse pose, like, and how like by doing those, asana practices ending with shavasana, we are training ourselves like to die and to be okay with death and to accept it and to know that that's just the next developmental thing that's gonna come up. So yeah, definitely. I think and yeah, with what you're saying about it being like a sixth house Thursdays kind of a thing, I think like Thursday is kind of like that last day that you got to push to get through the week, and so definitely doing like some kind of asana practice or even like cushion meditation practice would be really good if I'm feeling like energetically drained from the week and I'm like, I just need to make it through Friday, like that would be like an excellent boost, like to do that on a Thursday evening. I think I'm having like I'm feeling now like I definitely want to spend more time journaling what I do on the different days of the week, because you're like asking me what I do on Thursdays and I'm like, oh goodness, it's hard to kind of pull up. It's a little bit easier to think about the weekend days, but I feel like the week's a little bit more conflated. But
yeah, it's interesting you say Thursday evenings, because that's the night of the moon. And so that like circles you back to the body. Right. And so even thinking about those, like I haven't gone through and tried to like write a series of posts yet about the night side, although that's the next part, the next goal at least. But thinking about the fact that, on Mondays, Monday day is the day of the moon, but Monday night is the night of Venus. Hence, like marriage meeting, there's some things like literally Dr. Ali Aolomi has a Patreon. And on his Patreon, he's doing a series of translations, one of which is translations of Isfahani's delineations on the planetary hours. And in that, he talks about I want to say it's the hour of Venus, actually. And so it's a nightfall, Monday night. It's like a good hour for talking about marriage, talking to your spouse, talking about household matters. And so that's like a good time to do that type of partnership thing if you're thinking about that. Or if you think about the restaurant industry, there's this running joke amongst industry folks about Monday nights being the night of professional diners. Well, yeah, people who like really want to do the moon, want to do moon day bodily stuff and Venus night whining and dining really well, they're going to do it that night. If you come to a restaurant on Friday night, you're coming to the night of Mars and you get a bunch of rowdy people, not actually like a great dining experience. You come on a Saturday night, you're coming on the night of Mercury, lots of shenanigans, lots of mistakes. There's a lot of activity and hubbub. It's really busy. It's great for the restaurant commerce, but not necessarily the best night to dine. Sunday nights are the nights of Jupiter. They're actually okay. Having worked in restaurants, Sunday nights that's a pretty good crowd. So kind of thinking about some of those things in terms of the really general, but then like zero in closer to your own chart. What houses are activated? Yeah, it's interesting to hear you like kind of already intuitively thinking about, yeah, on Thursdays I could do that, but it'll be Thursday night that I'm going to do that part of the practice. Or even thinking about the asana specifically. If we end the week on Saturn day, or we're thinking about like ending the practice with Shavasana, with death, with Saturn. But I think a lot of people are most familiar with going through a series that's about sun salutations, right? So it's like you start with sun, Sunday, salute the sun, and then when you're done saluting the sun, you get to Saturday and you die. That seems like a good, nice roundabout thing, just kind of like the week does. Maybe there's something you could do there, like going through the planets in the order of the planetary hours for the asanas, but that's way beyond me. I know Tuesday would be warrior pose.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's got to be something to that. Yeah, like there are just so many light bulbs going off in my head now of like things that I could do to align with certain days now. But yeah, it's so interesting because I was literally just talking with one of my like astrology friends about how I'm like I have Saturn and fall in Aries in my 10th house, and it's just a pain point. I'm like, I'm always asking people for like Saturn work, like what can I, Saturn remediation, what can I do for my Saturn? And then to spontaneously join this and talking so much about Saturn and working with Saturn. I'm like, Saturn's like, yeah, you called me, I'm here, what's up? Like
yeah. Oh, that is really interesting. I've been seeing more and more of your generation of Saturn and Aries. And it's interesting because Saturn, like you said, Saturn does fall in Aries. Saturn is not particularly happy in Aries. And I've been trying out this like more ecological language for dignity. It is very much a work in progress, but I'm thinking about words like, or concepts like being really successful in a niche instead of like owning the house, or instead of being exalted and like having the responsibility of stewardship rather than like, well, Saturn owns this and has the rights over, Saturn. And so what would fall be? Maybe that would be like being in a niche you're not adapted to, or like having your niche, yeah, being in a niche you're not adapted to, right? Saturn's not adapted to the niche of Aries. But Saturn does cooperate in the triplicity. And that's the one type of dignity that doesn't have an inherently like legalistic hierarchical empire state type of origin. Triplicity is likened to the support of a non-family member. And so maybe we can think about triplicity as like having some kind of like symbiotic relationship, or like the animal odd couples or something, where it's like, yeah, Saturn is not in its own niche, but Saturn can find another species that's like, like, yeah, the animal odd couple stuff. The dog and the cheetah, where it's like, this cheetah needs some sort of friend, so we give it a golden retriever puppy friend to have, because then they'll get all the little things that they need in that sort of companionship. Saturn at least gets that. So Saturn gets like some kind of support, or can provide some type of support, and it's probably going to be like friends, or thinking about 10th house qualities like mentors. And with Saturn and Aries, the thing I've been thinking about, and I think that this is true for all types of supposed detriment, that it's like there is a longer struggle, it's a steeper learning curve, but eventually there is some type of mastery that develops. Like the Saturn and people who have Mercury in Sagittarius and Pisces that I know are some of the most articulate, clever, smart, incisive, brilliantly poetic people I've met. And they definitely do Mercury different. And they all speak to some sort of internal sense of struggling with Mercury. and they eventually get to a place of doing Mercury just as Mercury as anyone else. And so with Saturn and Aries, the thing I've seen is this like refusal to waste time. Like when I talk to you all, the thing that y'all seem most upset about is the idea of like wasting any amount of time. Like time is too precious. Why would I waste it being young and not knowing stuff? Just tell me the stuff so I can know it so that I can stop wasting my time. But like that's the one thing that Saturn won't let you off the hook with. You just have to do the time.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
being said, like you can lean into Saturn and listen and notice. And I think that's part of what makes it so eventually y'all end up like aging in reverse, like Benjamin Button, learning the secrets of life. Like, I don't know that Rick Levine has Saturn in Aries, but he's like the kind of energy I think of. He does have a lot of Aries energy of just like being able to just harness all the power of fire, but it's from getting through like accepting time, being in relationship with Saturn and like fully embracing that.
Yeah, yeah. I've been thinking so much about like the impatience of Saturn and Aries, like, and just trying to recognize and name it when I see it myself more. But yeah, definitely like what you're saying about just like almost like a rage when like time is being wasted, and like if there's like a lack of efficiency or things aren't like lined up correctly, it's just like this internal rage, like, oh my goodness. And then like but then it burns off quickly because it's Aries, it's not like
Mhm.
it's not something that I feel like a dwelling in. But yeah, and I think like what you're saying about planets being in detriment or fall, and eventually like we gain mastery over them, is it's almost like they're like a very like dysregulated child that's just very loud, and so because they're so loud, they're going to get more attention from their caregiver, um and the people around them, because they're like screaming like I'm not okay, like I'm hungry, I need something, and so they're just going to get more energy, from the self, because of that kind of condition, which yeah, which is what leads me to be, yeah, so intrigued to work with Saturn. It's just so loud for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. The first thing that kind of jumped to mind is like temperature, right?
Mm,
Saturn's cold, like ice cold. One thing I did in the lead up to my Saturn return to try to embrace more Saturn. So I was like, I'm pre-30. I'm going to embrace Saturn and then I'll have a great Saturn return. I did have a great Saturn return. It's probably because I have Saturn in Sagittarius and it's
mm,
ruled by a benefic. Um, and my Saturn return also coincided with some good transits for me. But thinking about like, so I took cold showers every single day, only cold showers, as cold as I could tolerate. And I'd like start it just warm enough that I didn't like seize up and like stop breathing because it was cold, and then turn it down as cold as I could tolerate. So I'd leave the shower with like my skin icy to embrace Saturn. That's kind of harsh and brutal, although there's some physiological benefits to cold showers. So you can like maybe play around with that, but like, play around with temperature, play around with, I think those things will be interesting access points to playing around with things taking time, to playing around with like, yeah, a hot cup of coffee is nice, but what's a cold cup of coffee like? And in the same way of like, yeah, it's nice to be efficient, but what's it like to let something go really slowly? Typically I'd be inclined to just like post my posts as soon as I have them close to being done, but I've been going really slow with this process of talking about planetary days and not rushing. It was September of 2021 that I first taught that class. And it's like January of 2023 when I'm looking at, pitching it to a local occult shop, and maybe I'll teach it in person and putting together a class series, like playing around with that. I prefer my oatmeal to have like nuts and dried fruit and brown sugar and some maple syrup and a lot of butter and dairy, but it turns out I can eat it completely plain. Um, Perhaps that type of like leaning into Saturn can give like the time fury part of your Saturn and Aries experience something to hold on to, and like in the same way that this might be kind of a weird parallel, but Saturn does rule intoxicants. Um,
mhm.
So I heard Michael Harner, this anthropologist who has since passed, speak at the California Institute for Integral Studies. This was probably over a decade ago, maybe even 15 years ago. He was talking about drugs in the brain. He was talking about drugs and entheogens and shamanic practices in the brain. And the thing that he mentioned, he was talking about entheogens, which is like an anthropological word for mind altering substances. Almost every single culture that has a mind altering substance uses it intentionally and purposely in a way that is related to spiritual practices or cosmology or worldview or spiritual things. And so we can use, in the anthropological sense, we can go ahead and use in this instance the word shamanic or shaman to mean like religious officiant, even though that word is like very specifically Siberian and means something particular in that context. If we use it in the like anthropological functional sense, then most cultures that have an entheogen use those entheogens for some type of shamanic purpose. And what Michael Harner was talking about was that, yeah, you can go ahead and use a drug and it will take you to the spirit plane. Some of them take you to a very specific one, different ones, like it'll depend on your culture. But most cultures have that method or vehicle for getting there. And they also have one that's like the slow way, that's like the dances where you rock the head backwards. Like that'll eventually get you there, spinning in circles. Like whether you look at a small kid who spins until they're dizzy on the tire swing or whatever, or on the carousel, or you look at the whirling dervishes. Now, obviously, a child who's spinning themselves nearly sick on a tire swing is not engaged in the same spiritual practice as a whirling dervish, but it is the same physical mechanism that is altering your consciousness on a physiological level or altering your perception of reality. And so Michael Harner was saying that essentially the drug is the thing that blasts you to the place so that you know what it feels like. And it's meant to help you get there the slow way. It's meant to help you get there when you like dance ecstatically around the fire or rock your head backwards or spin. But if you've like, it's hard to spin yourself to the spirit dimension if you don't know what the spirit dimension feels like. And so there's this entheogen that helps you go, oh, that's where I'm supposed to get to, so you can spin right, so to speak. I'm very much paraphrasing from my memory. But that came to mind as I was thinking about like, and I've actually been talking with my partner and a few other folks about Saturn specifically. Like many of us who are into astrology want to tap into Saturn's lessons before we've had a full Saturn return. And Saturn is about time. You can't shortcut the time part of that lesson. And so anyone who's like made it over 30 or into their mid 30s is like, oh, right. Okay. I can see my youthful ways and why no one bothered to tell me these things, because you can't transmit the lesson of time faster. And yet, so you can't just be in the spirit plane as an incarnate human. And yet you can like take an entheogen and see it. You can spin yourself there. And so I guess what I'm in a roundabout way trying to point at is I think part of what planetary practice is, part of this, like all these different ways of attuning, smelling horrible smells for Saturn, smelling beautiful smells for Venus, eating our nuts and pistachios for Jupiter, or, drinking our wine, whatever, getting stoned for Saturn, maybe, or maybe it's for Mars, lighten it up. Doing these things are ways of accessing that planet sphere so that we can see them without having to do any of that stuff. Just like the cushion meditation practice is so that you make a habit out of being mindful and present all the time. When you're eating, when you're in a traffic jam, when you're in the grocery store and the music's really terrible, and you fucked up and you had to go on a Saturday anyways, like that's what the planetary practice is for, right? That, or at least that's my thought, my theory, that maybe finding pleasure in shavasana and ice cold showers is the way that you can like find a appropriately dark sense of humor about time, because that's Saturn steez, but like, so maybe not joy, but a dark sense of humor in appreciating how slow time is, or things being really inefficient, and that actually like opening up something magical, something that wouldn't otherwise be there if the mistake or the slowness or the inefficiency didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. When yeah, when you were talking about like that impatience of like wanting to know things before your Saturn return, I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it. I had seen a tweet recently about like sometimes knowing too much like when you're young makes you old too fast, kind of a thing.
Mhm.
That wasn't the specific wording, but and just yeah, like what like yeah, maybe that like that impatience of of particularly Saturn and Aries of just being like, oh well, I want to, I want to take more information. I want to take more wisdom before I'm, I have the framework, the mental cognition or life experience to really be receiving it. And how that can have a detrimental effect. But like you're saying, just to like take pleasure in the Saturnian mundane, like um uh, things that we wouldn't normally choose, consciously to take a cold shower, but when we do, we feel like, oh, I have a body, and the body is cold, and um yeah. Mm,
Yeah. Or
love
like,
it.
talk to your elders. That's the surefire, the only way that one could ever possibly hope to gain access to the wisdom of time that is greater than the amount of time they've actually experienced, is to talk to people who have experienced it. So like I chatted with my mentor about this weird thing I'm feeling. So I just turned 35 and I'm having this bizarre experience where I looked at a picture of myself at 28 and I could remember feeling 28 and feeling so mature and so different than I did at 18. But when I look at a picture of me at 28 to my 35-year-old eyes, I look like a child. I look super young. I look not an adult. Um, and I definitely was a fucking adult. I'd lived on my own for 11 years at that point, So I'm like, weird. At 28, I had 11 years of like adult life experience, paying my own bills, making my own choices and decisions. At 28, I was definitely an adult. But I like myself now is like I was so young and I was just a baby. And then my mentor laughed, and she's like, yeah, I can tell you right now, at 45, you're going to look back at 35 and go, I wasn't really an adult yet. I was still so immature. And then it'll happen at 55 and 65. But at 65, it will have happened to you so many times. You can kind of feel a little bit. You can start to preemptively get a sense of how that's going to feel when you're 85. That you're going to look back at your 65-year-old self and recognize the ways in which you were still immature and hadn't accumulated very much experience. And maybe it's kind of like, when you're young and you first get a crush, you're like, am I in love? How do I know if I'm in love? And all the adults around you are like, you'll know when you're in love with someone. But they don't explain it, and you're so angry, and then you like feel love. Or like if you ever ask that question about an orgasm, how will I know if I had an orgasm? And everyone's like, you will know. Like you clearly haven't because you asked that question. But you can't explain that to someone who hasn't had that experience yet. But people who are older than you can remember your age experience, and they can give you the amount of like access to years beyond that you can soak up. And like there isn't, I mean, yeah, you can't go there faster. And I don't think it is like the way you said about like, oh, not being cognitively there yet or not having the framework to accept. I think it's more just about the fact that time and experience aren't the same thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
We have experiences throughout time, but time is separate from experiencing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and so much experience can be condensed into certain periods, and yeah, yeah. I work with two women, and one is in her mid 40s, and the other is 71 years old. So I get to spend a lot of time. I meet with the 71-year-old every day, and catch up about, take notes and stuff. But we also just catch up about life stuff, and like sometimes, but like we have a very like open communication, and sometimes we'll be like kind of troubleshooting, talking about things with the school and everything. And one time I was like, well, we have all this interest. Why can't we just open more classrooms? Like, why can't we just bring in all the children? Like, all these people want to be here. Let's just bring them all in. She's like, no, Heather, like you have to, you have to start a toddler classroom to seed a 3 to 6 classroom. You have to start a 3 to 6 classroom to seed, you know, a 6 to 9 classroom, and so on and so forth. And yeah, and just that wisdom from, in that moment, just like feeling so much like, oh yes, I'm the younger generation, and I'm learning from my elder here in this moment, that you can't just, run off and start things so sporadically, like I want to do all the time,
That's
being 25 years old.
That's beautiful. Now, so here's the thing that's like really trippy to me about Saturn and Aries specifically. When I was 25, I did not have the maturity or the wisdom to care that much about what my elders were saying. And so while your generation is like, I hear the impatience, and a part of me as an older person, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, you can't rush that. And yet you actually are like arriving at these like very mature outlooks. And this, like, you said you have your Saturn and Aries in the 10th. And so there
Mhm.
you are doing your 10th house doing out there in the world. And there's this elder mentor who's like, whoa, 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 slow down. No, that's not how that works. Let me explain it to you. And you received it. You didn't like then turn around and go, this old person thinks that I'm wrong. I'm going to show them. You're like, oh, thank you for telling me how this works. So like you are still kind of like doing it faster. You're doing Saturn in an Aries speed, but like you're already maxed out. Like you still can't like get to 30 before 30, but you are still doing it faster than like a Saturn in Sagittarius at the very least.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I was talking with one of my friends who also has Saturn in the 10th about just always like I was like, well, what's that like for you? Having that placement. And she's like, I'm always the adult. Like I always have to be Saturn because it's just there. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. It just, ever since, I was a little kid, like, oh, I'm the big sister in charge of taking care of the little brother, or I'm gonna be the one telling everybody how we're gonna play the game kind of a thing. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, just like having a lot of that Saturnian energy, but yeah, just being an interesting flavor with that Aries, with that martial, just quickness. But yeah, definitely. Yeah, and oh yeah, I have another friend that's in her 70s as well, and just I feel it's interesting because when you're first talking about elders, I had this like aversion coming up. I was like thinking about my own grandparents, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to spend Saturday talking to them, like yikes. But then to think about like the other people in my life that are my elders, I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, I would love to talk to them on a Saturday, or um and yeah, having a lot of those uh, people of that kind of generation in my life, and in my work. Yeah, now that you were yeah, naming that I was doing that 10th house stuff with the older mentor, and then yeah, I've also worked with another woman that was in her 70s, so it's just, yeah, it's really interesting to
Yeah.
observe.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's see here. We've been here a little over an hour, and I feel like it'll be easier for people to watch a replay if it's shorter rather than as sprawling as the last one. And I do have plans to try to do another one this month towards the end of the month to like try to get ahead of. I'm not quite sure if it'll be possible to do, like, my idea is to have one live chat that is, hey, let's talk about the month ahead. Boom, 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 boom. Here's the highlights. People, do you have questions about what this means for your individual birth chart? And then I can be like, oh, you're an Aquarius rising. Cool. Saturn's doing this. Saturn's in your first. Let's make sure we're doing our dental work. And it's okay if you're feeling like I just need to go slow. I'm a no to everything right now. Like you're on track, but it's going to change, right? Saturn's coming to that second soon. So let's talk about that. Um, but I also like, schedules, logistics, a million thousand people who also have live chats that are interesting to go to. So I might just do that as a recorded thing and pop it out, but we'll see. Either way, feel like it's a good time to kind of wrap up. But if you have any like final questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear those.
I think it was cool that we talked about Saturn, and it was interesting seeing that other perspective. I liked catching that little back and forth because you both shared that little Aries like bit. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. So
Yeah.
definitely chewing on some things now.
Excellent. Excellent. Chewing on things is also a good Monday activity. It's the moon's
Mm.
relation to digestion, right? So like I think there are definitely different layers. You can go with a super general broad Monday's the day of the moon, and you can use that no matter what hour. But you can get all the way down to the super specific of like, well, Monday's the day of the moon, and I'm a Cancer rising, and my moon is in this sign. And so during these hours, these parts of my chart are being activated and highlighted. Some of this I like, it tracks technique wise. The theoretical math checks out, but in practice, I've only observed some of these things. because I just have one chart, right? And I can only observe so many things in a single day. So I'm very curious to hear both from you two here right now, but also anybody who's catching catching the replay, whether that's on YouTube or in the Patreon or wherever, to add in the comments if you want to. Like, are there certain days of the week where you go, oh, the thing I always do doesn't make sense at all, doesn't make sense in quote marks with the planetary day? I want to hear about that. What are you actually doing? Maybe that does relate or resonate or track with your chart in a very specific way, just like, with Heather, where we're going like, okay, well, you're a Cancer rising. And then that means that with, as a Cancer rising, on Saturdays, we're going to be more relational. We're going to be looking at 7th and 8th house topics, but where is your specific personal Saturn? It's up there in Aries in the 10th house. So maybe on Saturdays, it's a good time to kind of feel into who are those mentors? Who are those really close friends who are a little bit older, who can kind of shed some light on what's it like at 27, 30, 33, 35, 71, to do whatever it is that you're wanting to do in the world, or maybe talking to like older yoga teachers or older folks in at the yoga studio. They might have some really interesting insights into what you're doing that maybe doesn't seem super obvious on the surface, I guess. And on down the list. We can certainly do like, maybe we will just kind of casually start a series of 7 weeks of talking about different planets. We mostly just talked about Saturn today. And so maybe the next time we meet and talk, we can talk about Jupiter, and we'll just keep kind of descending down. And then we can kind of bounce back up through when we hit the moon and do it in reverse.
That's beautiful. Thank you both so much. It was really spontaneous, me catching your tweet about this. So I'm really happy that I got to connect with both you, Bear and Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Heather, and wonderful to see you again, Anna. I hope we can keep doing this and I get to see you both again. And if you have any if y'all have any questions about like working with planetary days and how that works in your chart, feel free to shoot me an email, drop me a line. If you magical mystical people in the future watching this recording have questions about planetary days for yourself, definitely feel free to shoot me a line or drop a comment. I'm happy to answer questions. And like I said, I'll make it a point to actually publish this series of posts and get them out sooner rather than later for folks. I'll probably do something like the general overview of the planetary day and a couple of things you can do to access that planet on the public and on the like free membership level on my website. And then I'll probably do the in-depth day by day that's got like practical magic challenges and questions specific to each rising sign for each day of the week. I'll probably publish that in one of the premium tiers, just since it is taking me a lot of hours to write that content. But either way, thank you so much for joining me today and trusting me with your time and sharing your stories and being vulnerable with me and being comfortable with sharing them publicly. I really do appreciate it. And just like in session, it's a privilege and an honor to get to hold a space and chat with you all.
Likewise. Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Yes.
Bye.
Great day, guys.
Bye.